Oh yes, here's the another part. The toy is talking to him and says, "Chief need wife. What beautiful one. Good cook." Yeah. So that didn't age very well, I don't think. So I'm gonna just unhaul that one. Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. It is time to do another one of my read it or unhaul it challenges with my giant jar full of books. So I'm going to pull another fiction and a non-fiction out of here and we'll see what we get. And hopefully we get some good ones. Last time I ended up with some DNFs and a 2-star and then another 5 or 4.5 star for a non-fiction. So we will see what I get out of here and let's just try it. Stir them up good. I haven't pulled one for a while because it took me a long time last time to finish that non-fiction. Okay, what do I got here? I got a kid's book. Yes. The Indian in the Cupboard. Now I remember that one from when I was a kid, and I'm really curious because I kind of think it's probably quite racist. So don't know if I'm gonna read that one all the way through, but we'll take a look at it. And let's see. Non-fiction. Here's a non-fiction. What is it? It is Homesteader. Okay, so that'll be one about settlement in the prairies and whatnot. So I will go take a look for that book. I'm back. I found the book. So this one here is called Homesteader, and it's a really old book. This one it was published in the 70s, I think. Yeah, 1972. And it's basically a prairie boyhood recalled. So we'll give that a read and see what I think of that. We'll read the first chapter or so. I apparently paid 50 cents for this at a used book sale. So, and then I found this one here, The Indian in the Cupboard, which was a classic back when I was a kid. However, I opened it up to a random page and read, yeah. "No tell from scalp on belt if it belonged to coward or brave man," he said slyly. "Let me kill and I do dance round campfire." And yeah, other various things. And then I flipped through again a little further and it's like, let's see. Oh yes, here's the another part. The toy is talking to him and says, "Chief need wife. What beautiful one. Good cook." Yeah. So that didn't age very well, I don't think. So I'm gonna just unhaul that one, and I'm gonna pick a new fiction book. Okay, what's this one? This one is, oh, that's another Dick Francis one, but I've read like 2 Dick Francis ones in this already, so I'm gonna put that one back. I have a lot of them, that's why I've read a lot of them, but let's see, what's this one here? A Bird in the House by Margaret Lawrence. So that's a Canadiana classic one, so I'll see what that one, I think it's actually right back here. Yeah. All right, so A Bird in the House by Margaret Lawrence. So this one here, in 8 interconnected, finely wrought stories, Margaret Lawrence recreates the world of Vanessa McLeod, a world of scrub oak, willow, and chokecherry bushes, of family love and conflict, of a girl's growing awareness of and passage into womanhood. So it looks like it's kind of like a coming of age type of story. So yeah, I will read the first chapter of that and see if I feel like actually reading it. It's a Canadian classic, I believe. It came out in When did this one come out? 1963, looks like. Yeah, it's a Canadian classic, so we'll give that a read or start it anyway and see what I think of it. So those are the two books I'm going to read, and the one I'm definitely DNFing because it did not age well. And I will let you know what I think of them. Well, it's a beautiful day outside, so I'm sitting out here reading, and I thought I would give you guys a little update. So I actually finished this book that I was reading last time. In the last vlog, I hadn't quite finished it. This was the one that I was reading for my BTS book club challenge. This was my pick for April, and it was a book based on your favorites, inspired by your favorite song. So, and like I mentioned in the previous one of my favorite songs is On, and it's got some fantasy elements and, you know, kind of fighting back when you're down and all that sort of thing. So that's what this book is about. It takes place in Viking Age. It's about a young man named Sigurd. He's the son of a jarl, and his father gets betrayed by the king that he serves, and he and all of his family are killed except for Sigurd. And so then he goes out to get revenge. And so it's basically a revenge story, and it has fantastical elements to do with Norse mythology and everything. So I had read this one before. This is the first in a trilogy. And this time when I read it again, I did end up giving it 5 stars again. Mainly because the characters are so good and like I just get sucked into the action. There's a lot of really crude banter and that sort of thing in it that normally I probably wouldn't like as much, but the characters are just so good that I kind of, you know, ignore all of that, anything that kind of bothers me, you know, in that. So I just really enjoy it. So I'm looking forward to actually reading the rest of the trilogy, which I haven't read yet. So that was that one. Then for the books that I had picked for the Read It or Unhaul It, this one here is that one, Homesteader, that is the nonfiction, and it's about, basically it tells the story of a family from England coming and settling in the Canadian West. And I did read the first 16 pages, so I'm on to chapter 3, and I'm finding it interesting enough so far to keep reading. It's a time period that I am quite interested in because of doing family history and reading my grandfather's stories about when his family came over from Germany. And he had written all of his stories down, and so reading that was really, really interesting. So yeah, so far basically he's just been talking about his father leaving leaving England to head over, and he and his younger brother and his mother, I think it's his younger brother, and his mother are still in England. And I just thought it was kind of interesting. There's a couple of spots here where he talks a lot about how the government really kind of tricked people into coming out to Western Canada by offering them cheap land and saying that it was really good land, and that, you know, there was no issues out here, and that it was going to be kind of basically smooth sailing. And I just thought it was kind of funny, a couple of the lines. There's this one here. There was a pamphlet from the William Pearson Company, which had... That's one of my mules. He wants me to feed him. I will after I finish this reading sprint I'm on. There was this pamphlet from the William Pearson Company, who had land to sell in the last mountain section of southern Saskatchewan. Percy A. Maxwell, a hard-headed skeptic who nevertheless had been cozened by this Gull's Horn book, later wrote, "You needn't believe all that Pearson's book says about Last Mountain. It says that water of the clearest and purest is obtainable anywhere. So it is in the months of April and May, when the snow melts. But unfortunately, neither we nor the horses can drink enough in those 2 months to last out the other 10. I just found that kind of funny because growing up in the prairies, I know how patchy the rain can be. And then this other one was McGraw and Company had put out a pamphlet basically trying to encourage people to come to the West. Some of their facts in their brochure included that there's ample rainfall and cyclones never occur, and there's an utter absence of rest, and insect foes are unknown. And that one just made me, honestly, I actually laughed out loud when I read that, because the mosquitoes are so bad here, and the grasshoppers get bad, and there's just, you know, there's always, you know, the guys who are farming who are always fighting insects and stuff. So anyways, I thought that was just kind of some funny history. And then today, I actually, when I was doing some reading sprints, I read the first chapter and a little bit of this one here, Margaret Lawrence's A Bird in the House. And I'm on page 48 now. I think I am going to continue it. I'm not finding it super interesting so far. It's one of those kind of coming of age stories. So basically, this one is about this girl named Vanessa McLeod. And at the point that I'm at in the story, she's only 10 years old. And it's kind of about her family, who are Irish and Scottish. Her grandfather had immigrated to Canada, and so basically it's kind of her story of coming of age. And so the writing is good, but I'm not finding it like super interesting so far. There's not a lot that's happened yet. But I'm going to keep reading it and see what I think, because the writing is good. Her style is very readable. So I am going to keep reading that, and I will let you know where I get with that. Hey everyone, it's been a little while since I recorded an update, so I thought I'd do that. So I've been reading this one here, that's the Margaret Lawrence one, A Bird in the House, and I have now gotten to about page 78, so I'm getting close to halfway, and I'm still reading it. I'm not finding the story like too terribly, hi Stevie, I'm not finding the story like too terribly exciting. It's kind of a typical classic coming of age story. But the writing is good enough that I'm still reading it and enjoying it. It's not my normal type of book. So we'll see when I get to the end and how it ends and everything, and we'll see what I think of it, because it is, I mean, like I say, it's keeping, the writing is good enough that it's keeping my interest. So but it's just not much is happening. It's kind of that typical coming of age literary fiction. Then the other one is this one here, Homesteader. And this one, it started out really kind of slow and not too terribly exciting. And then he got to the part where he was telling the story of how his father actually went and, created their original homestead. And I'm starting to find it quite interesting, like just realizing how much work these guys had to do. Like he had to dig the whole well and the whole cellar for the house by hand. All he had was a crowbar to dig down into the sod and a shovel, basically. And he dug out like a 12-foot deep well, 12-foot deep, 6 feet across, I think, and a whole basement. So yeah, like the amount of work that these guys put in, and like, breaking the sod and everything, and just like, I'm just astounded. And of course they had to build their house from scratch, and like this guy, he was out there by himself. When it came time to build the house, his neighbor came over and helped him, and he helped his neighbor with building his house. But it was just, it's intense. And I did also kind of enjoy, I marked this one spot, I thought this was like probably the best description of the prairie wind that I've ever seen, because if you've lived on the prairies as long as I have, and you start to not enjoy the wind so much. Like today, again, it's super windy out there, and maybe when I go out to do my chores, I'll take a video showing you guys how windy it is. And the wind gets really irritating. It becomes a real nuisance. And I just love this description. He says, "Wind is the curse of the prairies. Elsewhere it masquerades occasionally as a gentle breeze, coaxing springtime buds into flower. But on the prairies it displays its true character as a malevolent demon, smashing down standing crops after a rain, drying out the land before the rain has time to soak in." Raven, you gotta go up there if you're gonna go up. Drying out the land before the rain has time to soak in, tearing at the soil and knocking the very seed out of its bed, snatching at any loose board until its incessant rattle banishes sleep, playing on draft preventers like a reed, with a demoniac cacophony, sifting fertile soil into vast drifts, sweeping dirt through and into every crevice, as well as into eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, snatching reins from the driver's hands and tearing at them and the horses' mouths, a malevolent demon. And it's just so funny, because that is how, as I've gotten older, I feel about the wind, especially when I have to do chores, like, trying to fork hay to the horses and stuff in this wind. So anyways, that was just kind of a funny aside. And then the other one that I'm reading right now is this one here. It's called The Book of Night with Moon by Diane Duane. It's an older book, but this book I remembered from when I was a kid. It's about these cats who are wizards, and I couldn't remember the name of the book, and I didn't have it anymore. But all I remembered was that these cats were wizards, and it had to do with there were strings that they manipulated. So yeah, and I remembered it had something to do with like the cats could see like the strings that made up the universe, and they could manipulate them and that sort of thing. So I happened to the one day I was just Googling books and looking around for books, and I just remembered this one again. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna just try again Googling wizard cats and stuff, and see if I can find something that looks similar to that book. And so I did, and I came across this one, and the name finally sounded familiar, and so I ordered it in at the library, and it is the book that I remembered. So basically what it's about is it's about told from the point of view of this cat, and her name is Riao, and she is a wizard. She's a house cat, but she's a wizard. And then there's a Tom and a somewhat neurotic tortoiseshell, and they make up this team, and their job is to protect these gates and to fix these gates that the wizards can use. There's human wizards as well as cat wizards, and that but these gates are used to move between different places. It's like a travel system for for wizards. And they discover that one of the gates in Grand Central Station in New York has been damaged, and so they're repairing it. And while they're there, they come across this little feral kitten that has been wounded. Thank you, Raven. He's been attacked by rats, and they basically kind of rescue him, and they discover that he's starting out on his, this all happens in like the first few pages, starting out on his ordeal to become a wizard. But there's also something has come through that gate that wrecked it, and so they're not sure what. And so basically they have to try and face an ultimate battle in a war against darkness that began untold eons before the creation of mere man. So it's quite an adventure, and it's really good. I'm only 58 pages in so far, so I have lots more to read in it, but I am remembering it being good. The characters are cool, and the only thing that I'm finding is a little difficult is because she created like this language for the cats, and sometimes when she uses it, it's a little hard to follow, and the names of the cats are a bit difficult to pronounce and that sort of thing. But I mean, that's just kind of a minor issue. So I am enjoying that one so far as well, and I will keep reading those and let you know what I think of them. Hi, donkeys. Hi, Abigail. What are you guys doing? More stuff coming up through the ground in the spring. Hi, Abby. Hi, Candy. Yeah. Oh, there goes Honey. Oh, there goes Candy. Oh, and there's Cookie. Look at all of them go. Clyde. Here, do you want to hold this for me? Shuggy, you're getting left behind. Are you gonna roll too, Bunny? He's like mashing his face all over in the dirt. Clyde, you're so funny. Look at him. Hello, I'm back again to finally finish off this Read It or Unhaul It vlog. It's taken me a little while to get through these ones, but I ended up reading, I picked out A Bird in the House by Margaret Lawrence, which is a Canadian classic, and this one here, which is called Homesteader by James Minifie, and that's the nonfiction book that I picked this time. And this was an interesting one. I ended up giving this one only 3 stars. I think it was 3 stars. No, 2.5 stars. I gave this one only 2.5 stars. And this one I gave 3 to. So I'll tell you a little bit about why I felt that way. And then I'll tell you about a couple of other books that I read during this period as well. So let's start with the Margaret Lawrence one, A Bird in the House. So this one is a Canadian classic, and it is set in the 1930s. And it tells the story of Vanessa McLeod, who's a young girl who's growing up in the 1930s in a small Manitoba town. And this is she actually has 4 or 5 books that were written about this tiny little town that she invented in northern Manitoba. And so basically it's like a classic coming of age story. And there was a couple of reasons why I only rated it 2.5 stars. One was because I found it incredibly predictable. I find that coming of age stories that have been written in that period, when was this one actually published? 1963. So those coming of age stories that were written in the 60s and are kind of your classics, I find them very predictable in that, like, from the moment I started the book, I could tell, okay, this is the character, this is what she's going to experience, this family member or this one is going to die, and I was right about one of them, and then, oh, I bet you this person's going to die to teach her this lesson, and yeah, it happened. And so it was very, very predictable. And I read the whole thing because it was short, but I didn't really care for her writing style very much. I found it quite dull and boring. And the main issue that I had, though, was that I really didn't like the main character. The character, she starts out at age 10, and then it kind of takes through the 30s. And so she's a teenager kind of when it ends. And I just found her incredibly unlikable and very self-centered. Like, for example, here's one spot that I just popped a bookmark in. Her mother was sick in the hospital when she gave birth to Vanessa's brother. And she comes home and she's, been really worn out and everything, and, just struggling. And they're going to be hiring a hired girl to help her. And then she's going to go back to work with Vanessa's father at this clinic where he's a doctor. And it's just like, so Vanessa says, I got down from my chair and went to my mother. I don't want you to go back to the office. I don't want a hired girl here. I'll hate her. My mother sighed, making me feel that I was placing an intolerable burden on her, and yet making me resent having to feel this weight. She looked tired, as she often did these days. Her tiredness bored me, made me want to attack her for it. Catch me getting along with a dumb old hired girl, I threatened. Do what you like, my mother said abruptly. What can I do about it? Like, I don't know. I just found that things like that, okay, I get it. She's young. Like, at this point, I think she is 10 or 11. But, like, that is so unlikable. Like, your mother has just spent weeks in the hospital and almost died, and that's your response. I don't know. I just really didn't like the character. And there was a few other instances of that, like things that she said after, like, one of the characters died, and then, she's all she could think about is how it affected her and not how it was affecting the people around her at all. And I really didn't like the character. So because of that, I've also decided, I had one other Margaret Lawrence book that I had bought at one time, and that's The Stone Angel. And that's another one that's set in the same little town. And I think I'm just going to actually unhaul both of those because, like I say, I didn't care for her writing very much. And I didn't find this one good enough to make me want to read more. So I am going to unhaul those ones. Then I read this one here, which was Homesteader by James Minifie. There, you can see it. And this one I ended up giving 3 stars to because the middle section of the book I really enjoyed. But the beginning and the ending I found extremely dull. So that's where it was kind of hard to rate, because if I was just rating the middle section, I would have given it a higher rating. But because I struggled with the beginning and I found the ending dragged, I really kind of just gave it that middle of the range, that middle range rating. So basically what this one tells is the story of a guy, it's in the early 1900s, and his father, they're from England, and his father decides that he wants to homestead in Canada. And one thing that I found interesting is that the area in Canada where he homesteaded was near where I grew up. So it was names of places that were familiar to me and everything. And I knew kind of the climate and how everything looked and everything. So that was kind of interesting. But basically, the beginning part was told from James's point of view as a young boy, and when he's still in England. And I didn't find that part terribly interesting, just because there wasn't very much going on. Basically, it was just them waiting around to join his father. Then when he got into the middle section where he was telling the story of how his father homesteaded, I found that part super interesting, because it's an area that I've read a little bit about, because my grandparents also homesteaded in Saskatchewan. And they came in the early 1900s. I think my great grandfather, Conrad Stock, he came in 1905, I believe. And my great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents on the other side of my dad's family. That was J.J. Noggle and his wife. They came even earlier than that, in the late 1800s, and settled in Saskatchewan and homesteaded. So I found that really interesting because I've done a lot of family history and I love reading that kind of historical period, and just the hardships that they had to face, and, like, things that you don't even really think about. Like, I think I had mentioned before about the part about him having to dig a well by hand with a shovel and a crowbar. Basically, he'd use the crowbar to dig into the top soil, into the turf, and make an area that he could start digging. And he had to dig this whole 6-foot deep, or 6-foot wide, 12-foot deep well, by hand and everything, and building the house by hand, and breaking the virgin soil and all that. I just found that stuff really interesting. And then when the family got there, it was quite good to read about, with when, the difference between life in England and life over here, and how his mother felt about that, and the things that they brought with them, and the things that they wished that they had brought with them. And so that was really interesting. And then him and his brother going to a small country school, and the experiences with that, all that section in the middle was very interesting. Then it got to about 2/3 of the way through the book, and it got into the period around World War I. And I have read a lot of books in the last little while that were set in, or had to do with the wars and stuff. And I do find that interesting, but when I picked up this book, I was excited to read about the homesteading. I wasn't looking to read a book about World War I. And then I was reading about his experience because he was 16 and he signed on to help with the war effort. And he did end up going to England, but because he was too young, he didn't actually go over to Europe and do any of the fighting. And so his part of the war effort was actually, like, quite boring. And he talks about the fact that the things that he was doing were really boring. And when the things that you're doing are really boring, it makes for a boring read. So I found that last third really dragged. And I mean, while it was, interesting to see how someone who was younger and couldn't actually fight in the war might have, helped out and done things, that was fine. But I just found that it really dragged for me. So that's why that one got 3 stars. I did read 2 other books during this period as well that I wanted to tell you about. One was for that BTS book club challenge that I've been doing. And for the month of May, it was a multiverse book. And so the one that I chose to read, I'll put it up on the screen because I've already taken it back to the library, was called The Book of Night with Moon by Diane Duane. And it's a fantasy story. And it's a book that I remembered reading when I was in high school or shortly after that. And, kind of enjoying it at the time. And then I had been hunting for it forever to see if I could find it. And I finally did. And because I couldn't remember the name or anything. And so then I found the book and I ordered it in, and I quite enjoyed it. I ended up giving that one 4.5 stars. And basically it's a story about a group of cats who are wizards, and they look after these portals for travel with wizards between different dimensions and everything. And it's all in New York, in Grand Central Station. And it's just kind of a neat concept because, like, they can see the threads that make up the whole universe, and they can, like, use them to travel and everything. And so I like the concepts in it. There was quite a bit of it where, she would be explaining some concept and it was kind of like, ooh, your eyes would glaze over, but it still was very interesting. And they end up coming across this wounded kitten, and it turns out that he's a young wizard who's going to be going on his ordeal, they call it, which is basically your big test to see if you'll survive and become a wizard. And so they're helping him, but then that ends up leading them into this situation where they have to try and save the world from this big danger. And it's very, very interesting. I really enjoyed the general story. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars because it was one of those ones where I couldn't put it down at the end. There was one rather large plot hole at the end that it was kind of like, the way it seemed to me is like the author, started with something, got going on the whole big climax and everything, and all that happened. And then she got to the end and realized that she hadn't wrapped up anything to do with that particular moment. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to spoil anything with that particular element of the story. And so she just, like, made up a little reason for it to have gone a certain way or whatever in the end, that just kind of, but it wasn't like super important to the story. So I still gave it 4.5 stars, but I just thought it was kind of funny because I was like, I got to the end and I was like, wait a minute, what happened to this guy? And then it was like a couple pages later, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's what happened, which seems very anticlimactic to what was going on with him. So that's my only little beef with it, but I really enjoyed the story in general, and the characters were fun, and it was one of those ones that kept me on the edge of my seat. The last one that I read in this period was called Sweet Bean Paste. It's by Durian Sukagawa, and this is another translated book. And I know I had said I wanted to read like 12 translated books this year. We're kind of getting close to the middle of the year and I'm only on 4. This is my 4th one. So I'm gonna have to pick up the pace on that. But this one was a book club pick for one of the book clubs that I'm involved in. And so I read this one and I ended up giving it 4 stars. And it tells the story of a man named Sentaro. And he's just recently gotten out of prison. And he ends up there's this guy who basically pays his debts for him, and then he owes this guy back for his debts, and then the old guy who he owed passed away, and his wife has taken over, and so he's still paying her, and basically what she owns is this shop that makes this. It's called Doriyaki, and it's this treat with, it's like sweet bean paste inside of pancakes, apparently. I've never actually seen it, but it sounds like it would be tasty after reading this book. But so that's where he's at, and he kind of just hates his life and feels like a failure and wants to get out of there. And then one day this older lady named Toku shows up, and she has very disfigured hands, and she's in her 80s, I believe. And she goes to him and asks him if he will hire her to make the sweet bean paste, because he's just using bought stuff and it doesn't taste very good. And she says she's been making sweet bean paste for 50 years. And so at first he says no and kind of ignores her, but she comes back again a couple of times, and finally he relents and lets her come and teach him how to make the sweet bean paste. And it's through his meeting with her and learning her story, and she has some secrets that she's hiding, and learning about her and her story. And then there's also a teenage girl who also becomes friends with her, and it basically helps both him and the teenage girl to figure out some major issues that are happening in their lives. And kind of it's an interesting story with a really good theme, and it does talk a lot about how society views people who have had certain diseases or have had disfigurements because of things. And so it really is an interesting social commentary on how those type of people are treated in this world. And so there's very good disability representation in this book. I really, really found that interesting. There is a trigger warning for suicidal ideation in here that was part of, things that the guy was struggling with. And the ending, I cried during the ending. So it was very good. I didn't like it quite as much as the other Japanese book I read, which was What You Were Looking For Is in the Library. But I did really enjoy this one, and I would recommend it if you're looking to read something that's, kind of a poignant tale and has a really good message and, an interesting character, because the character of Toku is super interesting. I really got attached to her. So yeah, that was the other book that I read during that period. So I will sign off for now, and I will get ready to go and pick some more books off my shelves. So I will talk to you later. Bye.